Throughout history, betrayal between lovers was never a private matter. It was a crime against order, bloodline, and divine authority. When women were accused of infidelity, justice did not come quietly, it came with fire, stone, rope, and blade. Societies across continents forged punishments so extreme, they became instruments of fear, warnings carved into the public memory. These were not moments of rage, they were systems of control, sanctioned by kings, priests, and law. What followed was not mercy, but ritualized cruelty. And in that cruelty, civilizations revealed their true values. This is the legacy of punishment when love became treason. Drowned in the sack in medieval Germany. In the 13th to 16th centuries, across the Holy Roman Empire, one of the most chilling punishments inflicted on women accused of adultery was sack drowning or sacking. This form of execution was codified in various local legal texts and practiced in parts of southern Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. The punishment was not carried out in secret, nor was it a rare sentence. It was a public spectacle, a legal ritual, and a moral warning. The Saxenspiegel, a 13th-century German law code compiled by Eich von Repgau, described the crime of female adultery as a direct offense against the husband's honor and his household. While men accused of adultery were often fined or humiliated, women were subjected to deadly physical punishment. According to the Carolina, the 1532 Criminal Code issued under Emperor Charles V, a woman who breaks the marriage bond through adultery may be executed by drowning in accordance with local custom. The condemned woman would be bound and sewn into a weighted sack, often with stones or even live animals like dogs or cats, and cast into a nearby river. In places like Nuremberg and Augsburg, the punishment was carried out with grim ceremony. Officials and townspeople watched as the woman struggled against the suffocating darkness of the sack, unable to scream, flail, or plead. Drowning in this way was slow, disorienting, and final. The body was usually left to float downstream as a warning to others. Drowning was often considered less bloody and therefore more appropriate for women. Yet the ritualized nature of sack drowning reveals that it was anything but merciful. The intent was to erase identity, voice, and dignity from the condemned. Adulterous women were viewed as moral contamination, disposed of like waste beneath the water in silence. This punishment exposed medieval justice as an act of gendered cruelty, where a woman was not only executed but erased, denied burial, and silenced in life and death. In Europe, during the late medieval and early modern eras, public executions by fire were theatrical displays of state authority and moral cleansing. For women accused of adultery, especially when linked to witchcraft or heresy, burning alive became a brutal method of punishment. Fire was seen as a purifier, and the woman's body, once accused of defying moral law, was deemed unworthy of life. By the 14th and 15th centuries, cities across France, the Holy Roman Empire, and Spain recorded cases of women burned for marital betrayal. In 1431, in Rouen, France, records show death by fire for immoral conduct. Though adultery alone was not always enough for execution, it often aggravated other charges. The Malleus Maleficarum of 1487 tied female transgression to spiritual decay, portraying unfaithful women as threats to divine order. Accusations escalated easily, turning adulteresses into heretics or witches. Executions occurred in crowded town squares, where women, tied to wooden stakes and surrounded by dry wood, faced roaring flames. Crowds gathered to learn a grim lesson that a woman's body and conduct belonged not to herself but to her husband and community. Burning alive was slow and excruciating, fire consuming flesh from the feet upward, while mercy, if granted, came only through strangulation or thick smoke. Under Babylonian law in 1754 before Common Era, King Hammurabi's code set death by drowning or stoning for adultery. Law 129 declared that both the wife and her lover must die, though the husband could choose to spare her. The law made clear that a woman's body was her husband's property. While men could sometimes pay fines, women faced certain death. Stoning, common across Mesopotamian cities, was a public ritual of moral purification. The condemned woman, stripped and bound, faced stones thrown by men of her own community until life left her body. It was slow, humiliating, and symbolic, designed to erase not just a woman's life but her existence, leaving only fear as her legacy. For the Babylonian state, adultery by a woman was not merely betrayal, it was seen as cosmic disorder, and stoning her to death was considered a necessary act to restore social and divine balance. There was no trial by jury, no appeal, the stones sealed her fate. Public pillory and flogging in colonial America. In the 17th and 18th centuries, across the Puritan settlements of colonial America, adultery was not merely a moral sin, it was a public crime. Colonial law, particularly in Massachusetts Bay, Connecticut, and Virginia, drew heavily from Old Testament scripture, treating female infidelity as a direct assault on divine and social order. Although execution for adultery was rare by the 1700s, public humiliation and corporal punishment became the preferred means of enforcing moral discipline. The most notorious of these were the pillory and the flogging post. Under the Massachusetts Body of Liberties 1641, adultery was technically a capital crime. If any man shall commit adultery with a married or espoused wife, the adulterer and adulteress shall surely be put to death. In practice, most colonies eventually replaced death sentences with severe public whippings and long exposure in the pillory. Women, however, bore the brunt of these punishments. Courts were far more likely to prosecute them than their male counterparts, particularly if pregnancy exposed their crime. In towns like Boston, Salem, and Williamsburg, convicted women were dressed in plain garments, tied to a whipping post, and given 39 lashes across the upper back, often in the presence of neighbors, clergy, and even their husbands. Afterward, they were placed in the pillory, a wooden device that locked the head and hands in place, leaving the offender to stand for hours as passers-by hurled insults, filth, or stones. The punishment was designed not only to inflict pain but to annihilate reputation, the ultimate social death in Puritan society. Women were sometimes forced to wear the letter A sewn into their garments, a real practice long before Nathaniel Hawthorne's fictional The Scarlet Letter 1850. The branded letter marked them for years, ensuring that the shame of adultery could never be escaped. Colonial diarists like Samuel Sewall recorded such sentences matter-of-factly, noting that a woman was whipped for fornication, in the presence of many, a grim reminder of how normalized these spectacles were. These punishments were as much about deterrence as retribution. The screams, the blood, the jeers, all were instruments of moral control. In colonial America, the woman's body became the canvas on which society wrote its laws of virtue, one lash at a time. Across centuries and civilizations, the female body became the battleground for moral control, scarred, silenced, and sacrificed to preserve patriarchal power. These punishments were not isolated acts of cruelty, but systemic tools used to uphold social hierarchies and religious codes by making brutal examples of women who defied them. Which of these punishments do you think had the most lasting social impact, and why? Comment below. Let the weight of history remind us, when morality is enforced through pain, justice is the first to die.